Okay, let's just dive right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of financial history that, honestly, it quite literally engineered the modern world. Yeah, we're looking at the birth of the venture capital operating system back in 1972. It's the year that built the financial machinery responsible for scaling basically all the digital wealth we see around us today.
So it starts with this kind of incredible contrast. How does a sleepy region, famous mostly for its fruit orchards, suddenly birth a multi-trillion-dollar digital monopoly? Well, in the early months of 1972, the Santa Clara Valley was facing this massive macroeconomic mismatch. It was a total clash of two completely different worlds. You had historic orchards being violently displaced by state-of-the-art silicon fabrication plants and these advanced research labs. The region was generating an unprecedented volume of raw, brilliant intellectual capital, but it had a massive problem. It completely lacked a mature, standardized financial infrastructure to actually sustain and scale all that growth.
To figure out how they solved this, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The 1972 financial chaos. 2. Sequoia's market scalpel. 3. Kleiner Perkins operating midwives. 4. The Sandhill Road revolution. 5. The dual chassis of capital. And finally, 6. The unbroken AI flywheel. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the 1972 financial chaos. So before the modern venture system came along, early tech financing was, well, it was highly informal and really fragmented. Brilliant engineers basically had to rely on casual local angel investors, or they had to go plead with these conservative East Coast banks that were looking for real estate collateral, things a tech startup obviously doesn't have. But that structural chaos was permanently resolved by two simultaneous fund launches. The first was spearheaded by Don Valentine in 1972 with a remarkably tiny initial fund of just $3 million. But Valentine, he was intentional from day one. He deliberately rejected putting his own name on the door and instead called it Sequoia Capital. He chose the California Redwood to send a very specific psychological message. This firm was engineered for immense longevity, structural strength, and to vastly outlast its founders. Now, just a few weeks apart, and literally right down the street, Eugene Kleiner and Tom Perkins launched their own seed fund of $8 million. And this represented a pretty historic union. Kleiner was a pioneering mechanical engineer who had fled Nazi persecution and later helped launch Fairchild Semiconductor. Perkins, on the other hand, was this brilliant corporate executive who had scaled Hewlett-Packard's early computer division. These two modest funds, launching almost at the exact same time, would end up becoming the twin pillars of a brand new global financial command center. Moving on to Section 2, Sequoia, the market scalpel. To really grasp the Sequoia engine, you've got to understand Don Valentine's profile. He wasn't some academic theorist. He was an elite, battle-hardened sales engineer from Fairchild and National Semiconductor. He viewed the microchip not as some pure scientific monument, but as a high-velocity commercial weapon designed to capture global markets. He completely inverted the traditional rules of technology underwriting. See, the old model focused heavily on groundbreaking academic patents and theoretical brilliance, basically trying to build a moat out of complex engineering. Valentine completely rejected this. His sourcing model was fixated with absolute monomaniacal clarity on the total addressable market size and the velocity of execution. His brutal, data-driven calculation was simple. Backing a brilliant engineer in a tiny market, that just ends in bankruptcy. But backing an aggressive execution machine in an exploding market with insatiable customer demand, well, the market's velocity will literally pull that company to astronomical success. And Valentine's very first deployments of capital validated this market-driven thesis perfectly. Take Atari back in 1974. Valentine saw that Nolan Bushnell's primitive arcade game, Pong, had tapped into this raw vein of human psychological addiction. He completely ignored the chaotic kind of countercultural vibe of their factory and just injected the capital they needed to scale the coin-operated amusement market. Then, jump to 1977. A young Steve Jobs, who was actually a former Atari technician, asks for seed financing for the Apple II. Valentine looked entirely past Jobs' unpolished appearance. He focused purely on the massive, completely untapped market vacuum for desktop computing. He backed the market, not just the man. That brings us to Section 3, Kleiner Perkins, operating midwives. So, while Valentine was busy engineering this market-driven commercial turbine, Kleiner and Perkins were constructing a radically alternative financial furnace right in the exact same neighborhood. They basically invented the idea of the venture capitalist as an active operating executive.
Before this, finance was all about passive merchant banking, meaning you'd just give a startup some cash, take a stock certificate, and sit back waiting for the quarterly reports to roll in. Kleiner and Perkins completely shattered that submissive paradigm. They absolutely refused to just sit back. Instead, they embedded themselves directly inside the boardroom and the laboratory of the startup. Let's break down how this created their intellectual midwifery loop. Step 1 was finding a fragile, isolated tech founder with a raw engineering startup. Step 2 was active KP operational intervention. They'd use their immense industry networks for these in-house executive raids, literally poaching elite managers from giants like HP or Intel and dropping them right into three-person garage startups. Tom Perkins also pioneered direct boardroom gating. He'd act as chairman and set strict, data-driven technical benchmarks before he'd release a single drop of additional capital. And this loop worked. Step 3 was the result: global industrial monopolies. They manufactured giants out of raw physics, providing the foundational lifelines for companies like Tandem Computers and Compaq. They proved, once and for all, that cutting-edge innovation is completely inert until it's actively married to uncompromising, hands-on operational excellence.
Which leads right into Section 4, the Sandhill Road Revolution.
This simultaneous launch of these two firms triggered an irreversible revolution in the actual physical geography of global wealth. Prior to 1972, investment wealth was totally bound to the East Coast model. Think vertical concrete silos, multi-story stone towers with restricted elevators, all designed to project multi-generational permanence and intimidating class hierarchies. Well, Valentine, Kleiner, and Perkins broke that mold entirely. They established their headquarters along a short strip of asphalt in Menlo Park called Sandhill Road, and they favored a brand new architectural form, the low-slung, horizontal redwood and glass pavilion, set back from the street with open patios and shared walkway commons.
The specific design of these sunlit wood pavilions wasn't just for aesthetics, it was meant to engineer a highly specific cultural outcome. Our source text defines this as total structural transparency and opportunistic fluidity. In simple terms, it meant getting everyone in the same room to make fast deals. The intimidating gatekeepers of high finance were just gone. Suddenly, you had venture partners, lawyers, headhunters, and tech founders all sharing the very same lunchrooms and outdoor porches. A brilliant computer science grad could literally walk onto an open porch with an unproven circuit diagram, strike up a conversation with a general partner, and leave with a multi-million-dollar commitment that exact same afternoon. This physical clustering created an uncopyable, self-reinforcing financial turbine that moved with incredible velocity.
All right, Section 5, the dual chassis of capital.
When we take a step back, we see that these firms weren't really competing directly against each other. Instead, they formed this brilliant complementary pincers movement. We've got the Sequoia scalpel on one side and the KP alchemical reactor on the other. Sequoia, led by the sales general Don Valentine, focused laser-like on the total addressable market. They sliced open huge customer volume with consumer-facing companies like Atari, Apple, and Cisco. On the flip side, Kleiner Perkins, led by the operating midwife Tom Perkins, focused on the technology pipeline. They took foundational deep tech straight out of university labs and turned it into systemic infrastructure with companies like Genentech, Sun Microsystems, and Amazon. If an opportunity was pure, high-risk biological science requiring years of lab incubation, it went straight down the KP pipeline. But if it was an aggressive consumer hardware play requiring immediate global market capture, it ran straight through the Sequoia engine. Together, they formed this unkillable economic flywheel.
Through this dual chassis, they completely institutionalized the modern venture asset class. They established the standardized independent limited partnership model and that famous 2 and 20 fee architecture. A 2% management fee and a 20% cut of the profits. Now, this is a vital detail because it successfully decoupled technology financing from Wall Street banking. For the very first time, it gave Silicon Valley absolute financial autonomy.
And finally, Section 6, the unbroken AI flywheel.
Now, you might be wondering, does all this 1972 history actually matter to us today? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. The historical trajectory is direct and completely unbroken. Tracing this continuum, we start at that 1972 Menlo Park axis, which fueled the desktop computing surge. That flowed right into the 1990s internet platform boom, where Kleiner Perkins backed Amazon and Netscape, and both firms co-invested in Google. The astronomical returns from that era permanently rerouted global asset allocations away from traditional stocks and straight into venture capital. And today, that exact same continuous engine is fueling what the sources called Phase 7, AI cognitive systems, dealing with incredibly complex layered neural transformers and capital-efficient AI models.
Today, a lot of this takes place in the hyper-dense urban fabric of San Francisco, what a lot of people are calling Cerebral Valley. The physical locations might have shifted slightly toward more urban outposts, but the architecture forged back in 1972 is very much alive and well. Modern AI founders demand those exact same walkable hacker densities. It's basically a contemporary digital manifestation of that 1972 open-air porch culture. And remarkably, the playbooks remain identical half a century later. Sequoia is still running Valentine's market-driven playbook, backing hyperscalable AI productivity platforms to capture exploding market demands. Meanwhile, Kleiner Perkins is dedicating massive, billion-dollar funding pools to capital-efficient AI infrastructure upstarts, seeking out that deep tech operational moat.
Which leaves us with this final, honestly staggering thought. The office complexes at 3000 Sand Hill Road broke the ancient tyranny of asset-backed finance. They proved that wealth really belongs to those with the institutional audacity to back human intellect. So if a combined $11 million in seed funding back in 1972 could permanently rewrite the parameters of human existence, giving us the desktop, the internet, and the entire digital economy, what reality will today's multi-billion-dollar AI funds engineer next? It's wild to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.